Hello. Hey guys, thank you so much for tuning in. I'm just starting to share my screen. Let me know once that is done. Should be right about now. Yeah. Hey guys, hey ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning into a small webinar. So we'll be covering the latest CV which came out, Follina CV 2022 30190, which is a remote code execution flaw and has a very widespread impact. We'll try and touch base onto all parts of the vulnerability, potential attack vectors, a small exploitation demo, and followed by what are the official workarounds for the vulnerability, right? So that's how we'll structure this particular webinar, and we'll take the questions at the end. Um, so, what exactly is Follina and how exactly did it come into picture is a very major question, right? So, Follina, is a very weird name. So that's because the original code that was found, or the original exploit that was found, has a number 0438, which is the area code for Italy. That's how it got its name. Now, introduction to the timeline, which is actually pretty complicated in this case. The first known exploit was found by somebody called Crazy Man, and he posted it to or submitted this particular exploit, or which he found from VirusTotal, to Microsoft Intelligence. But Microsoft did not assign a CVE to it at that point of time, which is which was early April. So we do know for sure that exploitation started in the wild in early April. He found it weird that the sample was using MSDT to invoke PowerShell commands, right? So that's why he submitted and did not get much attention. Then CloudSEK tweeted about it on 27th of May. That's how it got into the public eye. Then finally on 30th of May, it got recognized as a formal CV, and Microsoft assigned it. There was an official blog regarding it, and since then we have been constantly monitoring a lot of threat actors who have been using, and threat actor groups who have been using this particular vulnerability to start spear phishing and mass phishing campaigns, right? So now, let's directly tune into what exactly is the meat of the matter, or the elephant in the room. That's MSDT, right? What exactly is MSDT? That's Microsoft Support Diagnostic Tool. I think most of us would have tried to open the troubleshooting prompt which comes in for Wi-Fi, right? Which is mostly useless, but it's a functionality of Windows. It's called Microsoft Support Diagnostic Tool. What exactly is MSDT? It's a protocol which can be used to open MSDT from the CLI, right? Now, in this particular case, we'll be discussing as to what does this payload mean, what exactly are we trying to achieve, and how are we exactly able to achieve that, right? How is the exploitation exactly happening? That's what we'll discuss throughout this webinar. Yeah. Now, very small, brief insight into what the vulnerability looks like, or what is the chain of data flow. So, an attacker will create a malicious document, and that will be sent through various ways to the victim. The victim once opens the document, or even hovers over it in some cases, which is the zero click vector. Once that happens, it basically reaches the document reaches back to the document reaches back to the attacker server and invokes PowerShell commands. So this vulnerability basically affects any product on Windows which uses external URI protocols, right? Which uses MSDT. Now it's not only restricted to Microsoft Office suite, it might be Microsoft Teams, right? Now this is an interesting fact, by the way. So Microsoft Teams also had the exact same issue in August of 2021, which was fixed and reported by Positive Security. At that point in time, just because there was a social engineering vector which was involved in between, that's why it was not publicly disclosed by Microsoft. Also, it was not given a CVE ID. So it's not an old attack vector. It's just that now it has gained a lot of traction after we found after there was there was an exploit code in the wild. So that's how it has gained a lot of traction. Continuing the talk about the attack vector, it's actually, and to follow up on how old this attack vector is, it's actually a part of a bachelor thesis which was given in August 1st, 2020. That's when this thesis was pushed, and the security researcher Benjamin clearly stated how exactly can we use MSMSDT to invoke PowerShell, right? And how it was being done was because msdt.exe, all the strings that we are passing to msmsdt can be directly passed to msdt.exe, and then we obviously have the open documentation of all the parameters which we can use to interact with msdt. And that's how we are opening arbitrary arbitrary programs, right? That's the attack vector, and it was out in 2020. That's 2 years before. So in the current scenario, what exactly are we looking at? We are looking at two attack vectors. One is the zero click vector, obviously, which covers a scenario where you have the preview pane enabled. So I've got a screenshot on the right side of the screen. If you have in the view section of your file manager, the preview pane is enabled. It shows you a small preview of the document that you're going to open. So once you click on that document, there's a preview, and that preview basically leads to your compromisation, right? So you get hacked right then and there. Now the other single click vector is because once you download a document from the internet, it is read only. So you have to enable the editing. Once you click on enable editing, and that's where you get hacked. So these are the two vectors which are available as of now. And just because there's a zero click vector, it makes it extremely dangerous. And that's why it has been getting a lot of traction as well in the web. So now we come to the point that why Office again? We all of us are very familiar to the fact that Office has been used to, in phishing campaigns since, inception. We've got the macros. Now that the macros have been off by default, we've got this another attack vector which covers the external URIs. So how does this come into picture, and why is this an old attack vector? If we remember the older vulnerability, which was CV 2021-40444, which involved something called as MS-HTML, right? We looked at the exploit code, and using the right side of the flowchart, we understand that there is an HTML payload which is being hosted on the attacker's CDN. Now the malicious doc, once opened, reaches back to that payload, and that payload gets executed by the document, right? Now there's a very good question that can be asked here, which is why HTML, right? Why HTML, and why does it relate to our Microsoft document, right? So that's because there is something called as MS-HTML, an engine which can render your HTML code, which is what we are using. And that's where the older attack scenario, the CV 2021-40444 comes into picture as well, right? So we've got HTML code and a script embedded into it, and we fetch that. The malicious document which reached back to the attacker server has now executed our payload, which gives us command execution. So this is the simple flowchart of what we are trying to achieve using this vulnerability. Now, how exactly setting up the stage for a demo? What we want to achieve is to understand how are we exploiting this issue, right? We already know that a document file that you see on your desktop is actually a zip file, right? So if you unzip that folder and you've got a bunch of files in front of you, now there's a specific folder called _rels, which means relationships. Now, that document, the specific document that has been highlighted in the screenshot, document.xml.rels, is responsible for mentioning and for getting all the schema-related documents and schema-related URIs. So all of that will be mentioned in the document.xml.rels, which is where we are going to put or mention our attacker server. Right, that's where we will mention our attacker server. So there's an option where we can specify the target to be remote. So that's why it becomes extremely dangerous, right? This is what we are trying to change. If you see that we have in this particular sample which we found in the wild, you specify a relationship with an ID, and then there is a type. So and in the type we also have a target. The type mentions, if you look at the screenshot carefully, there's a type called OLE object. Now that OLE object is important because it instructs Microsoft to use MS HTML to render this particular code which we are fetching. In the target section, now we have the attacker server and the HTML code which we are trying to fetch. Then in the target mode, we are mentioning the mode, which is basically external or remote in this case. So this is how we are misusing the relationship, right? This is how once you open the document, it is trying to fetch code from our server and not from the official servers. Now, once we've manipulated the document, we now have the leverage to basically run JS code. Now we do have JS code in our hands. How do we get command execution, right? Now that's where Follina comes into picture. So this, as of now, we are setting up the stage for Follina and how exactly is it related to the older vulnerabilities and older attack vectors that have been, around since 2 years now. This is the basic Follina payload structure. This is as basic as it gets. Now here, if you look at it, it's HTML code. And then we are mentioning the protocol, which is MSDT, which is what we will be using to pass data to msdt.exe. In this, these parameters, we can play around with these parameters, but the most important one is the IT_ browse for file. Now there are some conditions and there are some things that you can do with this particular one. The way that it was supposed to be used was to open up a particular file. Now that could work as a simple proof of concept, like if I put calc.exe, right? That will open calculator. It will evaluate that particular file path. But what it can also do is invoke PowerShell and PowerShell commands, which opens a different way of exploitation, right? Once you have PowerShell in your, on your side, you can basically try and achieve a lot of things. So IT_ browse for file has the following conditions. There should be minimum of 2 directory traversals, and then the code should be wrapped with a $ and parenthesis, and there should be a trailing.exe. Those are the conditions to basically run your command. Now it could be as simple as this: running your command, running the file that you want, or it could be to increase the to increase the complexity, to bypass. We can have like different payloads involved. We can base 64 encode it. You can use the PowerShell magic and try and overcome the defenders and EDRs. So that's what a basic Follina payload structure looks like, right? Now in the wild, right, we have seen a lot of payloads where you will see that there are a lot of redundant bytes here, right? You see that I've removed redundant bytes here, but there were lines and lines of A's commented on it. So there's a reason behind it. By default, the MS HTML has a hard-coded number called 4096 bytes. If the file being fetched is less than that size, it does not get processed. So a detail into how the researcher found it is in the link here. I'll post the same link for your reference after the webinar in the chat itself, so that everybody can read it. So anything less than 4096 will not get processed, right? So that's what we are trying to achieve. We are trying to achieve that the HTML file that we are fetching should be more than a certain set of bytes, which is 4096 in this case. Now let's look at this particular this particular payload, which we will basically fetch. This is base 64 encoded, and it has got multiple directory traversals, and it has MPSI gstub.exe. So it basically qualifies all the conditions that we set. So this is one of the payloads which we got from the wild. Now coming on to the one of the most important parts of the webinar is, what have we found in the wild? What have we researched upon? What has our global threat intelligence team, who triage a lot of forums, look at all the OSINT information, what have we found? So we found that there are already a lot of campaigns, there are already a lot of threat actors who are targeting Middle East specifically, right? So we found this document impersonating the VIP invitation to Doha, and we see that there was a payload attached to it. We also look at the C2 server, which in this case is files.attend.dohaexpo.com. Now, a very interesting fact about this payload is, we have to understand like that the threat actors are getting creative day by day, right? So we see that this particular payload in general is mounting a drive, and you mounting a shared drive and then installing a malware. Now, how does that help? Right? How does exactly that help? So any normal forensic analysis or PCAP capture will not be able to fetch this data or be able to capture this data. So that's why that's a very crafty way of installing a malware. So that's one of the ways that we found in the wild. Then continuing this exactly, the investigation on this, we found that it treats Windows system and Linux system differently. And if it's a Linux system, it tries and installs Mirai variant, and as shown in the virus total sample. And it on Windows, it is trying and using malicious LNK files, which is basically a shortcut file. So that's what it is trying to drop on the Windows system, and then it deploys the OSD update.exe, which is a malware. So that's how generally the this campaign was working. Then there was another campaign that we found. Threat actors are extremely active in identifying what is the latest news around, in the community and what is the latest buzz. So they took advantage of the monkeypox awareness campaign, and they put out a fake document, which was using the given payload. Like I've given the payload here. Now, even this payload is extremely interesting. You'll see that the person has used add type and add, which basically means that now he can use the .NET framework. Now, this quite literally opens the gates of hell, right? All the red teamers, they one of the favorites is .NET framework and C#. So this can be used to do a lot of and a bunch of stuff. So this quite literally opens gates of hell, as I already specified. So it's very important to understand that there are multiple crafty ways that threat actors are using to get remote code execution, and then possibly moving laterally inside your infrastructure, because this is a remote code execution vulnerability. So it completely depends upon the intent of the threat actor. Like, what all can he achieve? If he wants to monetarily harm you, he'll be able to do that. If he wants to exfiltrate data and do intellectual theft, he can do that. So just because of the impact of the vulnerability and the triviality of the exploit, it becomes extremely dangerous. Right? So that's one of the campaigns. Then one of the early campaigns that we started looking at, as early as 30th. Was the Chinese threat actor group called TA413. They started impersonating the Women Empowerment Desk of the Central Tibetan Administration. Now, they also did the same, tried to bait people into clicking on their documents, and that's how they own the systems. Right. So even our global threat research team also tries a lot of dark web forums. So we found that there are a lot of threat actors who are already buying and selling mass exploitation kits, and there are already people who are talking about simple programs or simple EDR bypasses. That this actually proves a very important point, which is 97 to 98% of active exploitation that we see in the wild is using publicly available exploits. If you look at the timeline, this attack vector was discovered and put out in the open in August 2020. Right. Since then, it took one person to figure it out, or a team of people to figure it out how exactly can we attack this. And then once there were a lot of public POCs created since 27th of May, we found that a lot of threat actor groups have started, using this way to or this particular vulnerability to get remote code execution. So this proves that point. Yeah. Then we have an exploit sample. I'll show a demo as to how exactly does it look like. Just to put it into a brief flowchart, there's a malicious document which can be sent via email or can be, downloaded from the open webs. It gets downloaded onto the victim machine. Now there are two ways, as we've already talked about it. There's a zero click vector and there's a single click vector. Once that happens, there's an outbound connection to the attacker control server, and then it fetches the malicious malicious HTML code, and then that runs using MSDT and invokes PowerShell. So that's a very small flow graph to understand how exactly this works. I'm stopping sharing and I'll show a brief demo as to how does this exactly work. So bear with me, guys, just a minute. My screen should be visible now. Yeah. So think of the left side of my screen as the attacker and the right side of my screen as the victim, right? So what I'll also do is start the preview pane, which is basically what we've told, which is what we've already seen in the in the zero click vector. Once we start our attacker server, and we do see that there is a clickme.rtf document created. If I click on it and I see that there's a preview and there was calculator which has started opening, right? So it's a very small POC, but this is how easy it is to exploit your computer, right? You just click on a computer, you click on a document, and then using the preview pane, hover over it, and that's as simple as that, and you get compromised, right? So this was a very small exploitation sample that we looked at. Now, there's no need to, explain the attack surface, which is extremely immense, right? Microsoft products are being used worldwide. Okay? Just to put it into perspective, even now, even with Google Suites and everything, we still have Microsoft Office 365, covering the major market share. And it's not just that. Any document, any PDF, anything which uses external URIs can be used to do the same thing, right? So it is not just limited to Microsoft Office Suite. It's one of the things which uses. So good example would be MS Teams, that the way that we discussed, which is already fixed now. There was a patch last year itself. So for that. So that was one of the examples. This could put it into perspective, like how immense the attack surface would be, and that makes it extremely, even more dangerous. Talking about the impact factor of this vulnerability, which I've tried to explain throughout the webinar. Now, this could be used to, install malwares, ransomware, stealers, etc., onto your systems. Now, this will you'll get targeted by a lot of spear phishing and mass phishing campaigns. That's the start of downloading your document and then clicking on it. So botnet malware campaigns, obviously, then ransomware operations. Then we have obviously simple reverse shells. And now a very important part of the exploitation in this particular case would be directly stealing your NTLM hash, right? If there are hundreds and hundreds of payloads already available on Twitter for free to bypass Defender and basically get your NTLM hash. Now, how does that help? Threat actor can basically brute force that NTLM hash and try and get access to your AD infrastructure. So that makes it even more dangerous, right? Because you can compromise the AD infrastructure. Then we've got the business and the critical infrastructure impact. So we've already seen that in the last year itself, we had US dollars more than 14 billion in ransomware payments itself. The damages were even more, and it was almost 14 billion in just payments. APT groups and nation state entities have already started, the mass scale phishing campaigns, as we've already seen. Attacker can definitely put in, take over your server, have ransomware attacks, which can, definitely harm you monetarily and, result in data loss as well. So that's the impact of this vulnerability, which is immense. Now comes the important part. How or what can we do to save ourselves? As of now, there's still no available patch, any official patch. It's still considered a 0-day. Now, in the official Microsoft blog, we've got two workarounds which are mentioned. One is disable the MSDT protocol, URL protocol, which basically means that you won't be able to invoke PowerShell or use MSDT to invoke PowerShell, right? So you're disabling that. Second is you are enabling an attack surface reduction rule in Defender, which is called block office create process rule. Now, how will that work? Once you open your document, malicious document, it will open a process called winword.exe, and as a child process, it will try and open MSDT. Now, this particular attack surface reduction rule will stop your Microsoft Office from opening any other sub process or child process. So that is one more workaround that has been suggested by Microsoft. Now, what they've also done is upgraded Defender to basically track if there is any use of MSDT in command line, which was one of the ways that you could invoke PowerShell. And now there's one more. They've also added the malicious HTML documents, and they'll be identifying that also as a Trojan. So that these are the three ways that Microsoft has been working around to identify and create a safer environment, basically. Okay, now comes the important part for all the threat hunters. If you want to look at the and identify if your machine has been compromised, we have to use something called as a Sigma framework, right? It's a very popular framework, just like Yara. You've got a set of conditions that you give it to, and then it will look for those same conditions and identify if same exploitation tactics were used or not. That's one. This is still experimental, by the way, as you can see in the status and the example or the sample Sigma rule. But a better way of looking at it would be checking for outbound connections using MS Office Suite, right? So you can do that by using this reg key, which I mentioned. What will happen is you'll be able to identify how many outbound connections were made to what IP addresses, and that will be listed here. So that's one of the ways that you can identify where all my outbound connections went. So that's an effective way of identifying if you opened any malicious document. That was a brief into what what this vulnerability had to cover. And just to sum it all up, what all we discussed how we exploited it, the path to MS-HTML, and the older vulnerabilities, which is CVE 2021 and 40444. How MS-HTML is the culprit, why HTML, basically, why Microsoft Word needs to be concerned about HTML. Then what happens after that? Then we talked about the payload, which is in this case we were able to invoke PowerShell using MSDT using a specific parameter that we discussed while using the payload. So that's how you exploit the Follina vulnerability. So that's all. Thank you so much. I'll stop sharing, and the floor is open for questions now. Okay, so I see a lot of questions. The first is, can you please explain the parameters used in the MSDT URI scheme in this attack? Actually, those are, there is already documentation available for MSDT URI. The one that we have to concern ourselves with is the one that we talked about. Okay, I'll share my screen again and talk about that. So we discussed about the payload structure, which was here. Yeah. So this is the bare minimum which is required, right? This is the bare minimum. And if you see here, the first one, which is ID, we are actually defining what wizard are we supposed to use. In this case, it is PCW diagnostic. These all parameters are, you can play around with it. But the one which is the most important for us is the IT browser for file, IT browse for file, which has which basically results in the command execution. So that's the one which is important for us. The documentation for MSDT command line is already available. So yeah. Second is, has Microsoft released a patch for this? No. There has been an unofficial patch, but there is no official patch from Microsoft. It was patched for Microsoft Teams, but not for this. May I have? Yeah, sure. You can. We are actually recording this session live, so you can definitely go ahead and look at it live as well. Actually, that in the MSDT document there is no such parameter defined. Okay, I'll actually put the documents in the chat itself with the syntax. Issues. So this is the documentation for the MSDT, which can be used to identify the ID as well as the path, the other parameters that we were defining here. So that is what is being used. Because in essence of it, the MSDT URI is only so the MS MSDT is only a protocol which is being used to fetch MSDT. Researchers' work, which identified the buffer range and why is it exactly 4096 in the chat also. I've put both the links here. Any other questions, guys? That's all from my. A standard parameter defined by, or it can be renamed as per. No, actually, it cannot be renamed per user. It is a parameter which. Okay, so the name ID browse for file essentially means it will try and open a file. So it was used for opening a .exe file. So if you want to open a calculator, if you want to open, there's no need of PowerShell, right? But there's a catch to it. Using this parameter, you can also so using this parameter, you can also invoke PowerShell, which is or you can also use PowerShell scripting language, which is essentially what we discussed, right? So, and using PowerShell, we completely have we have the access to .NET framework. So that's why IT browse for file is important. Okay, can you explain workaround again? Sure. So the workarounds are simple. I'll share my screen again and explain the workarounds. So there are two workarounds officially mentioned. First workaround is to basically disable the MSDT URL protocol, and that can be done by this. We'll actually share a particular deck as well, and we've already sent out an advisory which you can look at our website that will have the workarounds. So you can run command prompt as an administrator and set up the following. So once you do that, it will basically disable the MSDT URL protocol, which is being used in this case as a sub-process. So that's one. The second is while you are attacking or while you are opening a malicious document, it creates a sub-process of MSDT, right? The parent process is WinWord and the sub-process is MSDT. So you are basically stopping or essentially telling Defender to stop that from happening. So those are the two workarounds.
Hey, Mihir this side. I just wanted to know a little bit more about the several directory traversals which was given as part of the POC code before an exe file name was given. So, what was the purpose of giving several directory traversal? Can you just explain it again?
Yeah, sure. That was a condition to make sure that your command is the file path is getting evaluated. So the minimum requirement is two directory traversals. You can have multiple. As we've seen a lot of payloads in the wild, that's how the internal system are working under the hood. It requires at least two directory traversals. So that's why the dot dot and slash and the dot dot.
So at the end, we can have any exe file name. It's not mandatorily anything which was given as part of the POC on the public forums.
Definitely, you can open Notepad, you can open whatever file you want, just with the correct file path, and it has to be under the dollar and the parenthesis. It should end with and you should append a .exe at the end. Yeah. How to detect if we are compromised? So to detect that, you have to look at this particular reg key and share my screen. Okay, for detection, these are the steps. Sorry. For detection, these are the steps. The first is you look at the Sigma rules, right? So we've got, as I explained, it's a very popular framework, just as Yara rules. So you can make a Sigma rule and then try and hunt for a particular, like for example, here, what we are doing is we are looking at MS, MSDT, and then the ID parameter, right? That's a string that we are searching for. So you can use that Sigma rule. That's one, but that's experimental. A better way of looking at it is looking at this particular reg key, where under the Microsoft Office 16.0 common internet server cache. What this will do is show you all the outbound connections. So all the IP addresses that your Microsoft document has interacted with, you'll get to know what exactly is that. So you can identify if it is something which should not be there in this particular reg key. That's how you can identify or detect if you are compromised. Yeah, I think Sahil has already posted the you know the detailed one that we've put in the detailed advisory that we put out. Cool. I think if there are no more questions, thank you so much, guys, for joining in.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.